Hi everyone, this is Elias Martin of CollectingJapanesePrints.com. Welcome to Woodblock Wednesday, where every Wednesday we get together and discuss Japanese prints, paintings, history, and culture. So today's Woodblock Wednesday is actually an interesting Woodblock Wednesday because it's not featuring an actual woodblock print. I thought I switched things up a little bit today and show an etching, a mixed media etching copper plate print of a very important design by an artist that I don't think has gotten his due here in the West, at least not yet. And you know, art is really interesting. It helps us reflect on what's happened in the past, and hopefully it allows us to understand what we need to understand to prevent things from happening or reoccurring in our present or in the future. And you know, the world seems to be in a little bit of chaos, at least here in the U.S. And I thought that this particular design and this artist's his background, his history, what he's seen, and what he produced might maybe speak to all of us and provide us with some solutions, or at the very least thought-provoking questions to ponder. So without further ado, let's go to the table and have a look. So what I have here is a very large print. It's an etching aqua tint work by Chimei Hamada. And Hamada, I'll give you his dates so that you become familiar with him. He was born in 1917. He passed away only a few years ago in 2018. He lived a very long life. And Hamada, as a young man, saw action in the Second Sino-Japanese War. And so for those of you who are not familiar, Japan went to war with China and Russia a couple times, but the second time when Japan was in conflict with China, it was about 1937, and it lasted up until the war's end, about 1945. And as a young soldier, Hamada has written, he left some diaries and some written accounts of the atrocities that occurred during the war. And, you know, when I talk about this design, I'll zoom in more carefully so you could see the details of it. But, you know, I'll back up a little bit while I'm talking. And the things that he saw were downright terrible. He saw some really terrible things that human beings can do to each other. And as a soldier, you know, he couldn't do anything but, you know, stand there and watch, if not participate. I'm not sure what his level of involvement was in the war, but at the end of the day, he definitely saw some horrific things. And he left a body of work that somehow tried to reconcile the atrocities and inhumanity that occurred during the war. And his body of work, by and large, is aligned with very graphic and at times very heartbreaking imagery. And you know, there's a recent exhibition of his work, and this book that was published that I highly recommend. I have it bookmarked here because there's an image of that print. And you know, there's some really interesting, compelling images. And you know, if you'd like, I'll just show a couple of the really I wouldn't call them graphic, but they are heartbreaking. I'll show one that is sort of pretty well known. Here's one of a soldier that has been hung. Oh, hold on, my phone is acting up. So here's one of a soldier that either hung himself or was hung in the barracks, you know, of military barracks. It's quite disturbing. So I'm trying to do this with one hand. Here's a very famous work of just a corpse. It looks like a woman who's been killed, and there's this piercing stick or spear that has gone through her. And I'll just stop showing things like that. But the point is, I wanted to give you a sense of his body of work. A lot of it is, as I said, very graphic, very dark, very disturbing, but also very important because it was a ex-Japanese military person who was always an artist. He was sketching designs, as he was seeing action. And so he brought back those designs as well as images that were seared into his memory, and he tried to deal with what he saw by producing very, very graphic, compelling work so that all of us can benefit from just the ideas that he's trying to advance. Now, in this particular print, this is his masterpiece, and I would say one of a couple pieces that are terribly important. But this large-scale print is, for those of you who can think of Oban-size prints, this is at least 2 Oban-size prints, if not almost 3. And what it depicts is individuals that are encased in what look like blocks. They could be cement blocks, but some kind of block. And the blocks seem to be floating up into the sky. And it's interesting. This design is very powerful for a lot of reasons. First of all, for me, this design really discusses the sort of, if I could use the term, block-headed nature of humanity, and yet our ability to transcend our limitations. And the ability to transcend the things that create such negativity in life, so that we could actually transcend them and soar. So these figures, in this image almost doesn't make sense, because there's these blocks that are cement-like, that have substance to them, that are not airy or light, and they're basically encasing each of these individuals. And one would think that because of their limitations of the weight and even the form, blocks aren't aerodynamic, that these figures could never ascend, and yet they are. And so it's almost like a challenge the artist is giving the viewer. What are our limitations? What are the things that are holding you back, or holding society at large back or down? What is keeping us down? And what is it that we could do to ascend? And in the lower part, you could see here a figure that has fallen. You could see his legs are up in the air, and there's like a square hole in the ground, and he looks like he's about to be swallowed up by the ground, which also suggests that this act of flying is not inherently something that we can do, but probably something we would need to learn through many trials and errors and failures in order to finally transcend these limitations. So let me zoom in so that you could just see this really wonderful design. And, I'll point this out for those who are interested, who are connoisseurs. The print is called Flight, and it was done in 1958. And there's several versions of this print. The one that's illustrated in the book, the version's a little bit more gray. It's lacking that orangey red color in the sky. And there's this version, there's a version with blue, and there's a version that's a little less orangey. But, they're all actually experimental trials. And so the artist, I believe, only made about 20 of the impressions of this design in total. And within those 20, there were just experimentations of color and how the artist decided to print. But I just wanted to share this design with all of you because it's a really hopeful design. I think it gives me a sense of hope. It's whimsical, and it kind of puts a smile on my face, because sometimes when we get past the difficulties in life, we look back and smile and go, "Oh, that was me. I did that," or "I couldn't believe I couldn't do that," or "I couldn't believe I couldn't get past that." And so this design does have all of those qualities, but it's also a challenge. It's a challenge to all of us to really consider the things that hold us back as a society as well as individuals, and it asks us, how can we transcend those limitations, those problems, so that we can soar, can fly, can ascend. I mean, I think those questions were very relevant in his time when he saw the things that he saw. I think those questions remain relevant for all of us now, particularly with the issues of COVID and people losing their jobs, and all of the insecurities that life may be bringing some of us. And so, I think it's art that helps us sort of repivot and our perspectives, and may offer suggestions or even just solace on how to deal with life's difficult issues. So I'm going to zoom in again so you could see the printing. And of course, this one it's not numbered, but it's an impression of the artist, so it's an artist proof. And within the edition of 20, there are a couple artist proofs, this being one of them. And I'm fortunate to have this one because this is probably, of the ones that I'm aware of, the darkest, most brightly colored impression, which I think adds for a much more dramatic and powerful design. Here we have his signature. It's signed over a little smudge from the printing. You could see here the beautifully rich, texture of the surface, where the printing of the inks meets the printing of the color. Those are interesting, sort of surreal quality that at first blush you might even think it's a Salvador Dali design. And I show this print often in seminars or talks about 20th century prints, because I often get questions about or comments about Japanese prints being designs of geishas and samurais and geishas and samurais underneath cherry blossoms and things like that. And yes, certainly Edo period prints depicted those things, plus a lot more. But 20th century Japanese prints dealt with a lot of serious topics. Now, certainly Shinhanga prints, by and large, did not depict or discuss issues such as war or other things like that. They were more in line with images that were nostalgic for old Japan, a peaceful, idyllic vision of the Japanese countryside or the Japanese landscape as it once was. But 20th century prints also had, Sosaku-hanga artists, contemporary artists, and I would categorize Hamada as sort of part of the Sosaku-hanga printmaking tradition. He started making prints in the late 40s. Mid to late 40s, when the Sosaku-hanga movement, was gaining steam, and he became quite well known after Japanese prints went international. And so he is part of the late Sosaku-hanga period, or international school of printmakers in Japan. So all of his designs were conceived by him. They were executed by him, entirely self-directed. So I'm going to back up so you can kind of see just the size of the print compared to the book there. It's quite large. It's very impressive. Zoom in one last time. Show you sort of the dramatic aspects of it. You see these little figures in the background, people encased in blocks, and then we see some that are ascending. This figure is almost out of the visual plane of the design. Here's some that are up close. And as I pointed out, there's one that has fallen, and he looks like he's falling right into the square hole that's in the ground. Well, I wanted to share that print, that very, very powerful print with all of you. You know, and as I mentioned, art is a very powerful tool that helps all of us take stock of what is happening in our lives, as well as what's happening in the larger, greater community of our own, and what's happening in the world. And right now, so much is happening. Not all of it is so positive that, you know, it's good to take a moment to reflect and see what we can do to make our own lives a bit better, if not the lives of other people. And these are questions I think are important things to ponder, as well as reflect when we're looking at important work by artists that have seen tragedy, that have firsthand experienced it, and are using that as a catalyst to create powerful, meaningful art. And this is why this Hamada print, Flight, is one of my favorite prints, period. It's so powerful. And I also think it's beautiful, but it's powerful first, and it's thought-provoking. So I hope all of you have enjoyed that as much as I have. And so I welcome you to join us again next week for our next episode of Woodblock Wednesday. And of course, if you haven't had a chance to visit my website, I invite all of you to pay me a visit. It's collectingjapaneseprints.com. There's a large group of prints. Some of them are sold, some of them are not, but all of them have information that I think would be useful to anyone interested in learning more about Japanese prints. I also have a bookstore, and so have a look at our offerings there. And there's a lot of links to different places around the web that has more information on Japanese history, culture, what is happening in Japan now, as well as Japanese prints and exhibitions. Unfortunately, most of them are not live, but a lot of the museums are hosting exhibitions that you could see online. So I encourage all of you to check those things out as well. So thanks again for joining me. I will see you next week on Woodblock Wednesday. Bye.